Hi, we're live. It's Rhonda Church Fenfrock of Fruitful Life Studio. I am in my studio live, which hasn't happened in quite a while, on my own Facebook page. I'm here today to talk about upcycling, refashioning, and visible mending, which is my passion. When I retired, I went into furniture painting and all kinds of crafty things, but then I got back to my love, which is refashioning clothing. I've been doing that. I've been sewing since the late 60s, early 70s, and refashioning for so long I can't remember. So I'm here today to show you a few tips and tricks on how to slow stitch and get some visible mending done. So whether you have a stain or need to patch a hole, this will do the trick. Now I've just launched my brand new, they're not new to me, but new to the public, my line of fabric panels. I probably have over 100 fabric panels that I have designed and had professionally printed, and I use them in my refashioning. For example, if you look at the blouse I have on, it's the same kind of blouse you see here, but I've refashioned it with one of my panels and some of my hand-dyed laces and trims. So that's one of the panels that will be available soon. I just loaded maybe 20 of them. Here's my favorite. It's an art piece called The Sirens, and I put it on the back of one of these blouses. So there's lots of different ways to use these patches and panels, and I'm going to show you some tricks for visible mending with inspiration from, let's say you're into Cantha cloth right now, so some inspiration from Cantha. We'll relate it to quilting stitches, but we'll also relate it to Sashiko, which is the Japanese art of stitching. It's a lot more precise, and I'll show you some tricks for getting some really fun little designs on your visible mending, like you see here on this panel. Now, one of the tricks I do if I know, because I am still I consider myself a beginner embroiderist, I don't know, someone who does embroidery. You see the back is a mess. That I would never show this to someone I know who is very precise and professional, but it's okay because this is going to be on a lined tote bag. You will never see that. So again, I'll show you a few tricks. So I'm going to turn the camera down in just a minute. Now these panels and patches that I have, I'm demonstrating how to sew them on if you don't sew with a machine. Now it's best, especially if you do retail or resale, that you sew with a machine, especially initially, and then you can go back and highlight it with the embroidery stitches. But if you don't have a machine or don't wish to, that's what I'm going to show you today. I'm going to show you how to do this by hand, how to create something that will stay on your garment without coming off by hand. Now I again have several panels, many panels. They either come in cotton sateen, which is a beautiful weight for quilts or lightweight garments or blouses or shirts, but I also have, this is another example of the design that I have printed. A lot of times I will print my own artwork, but this is a canvas print. So I also have some of them printed on canvas, which is more substantial. It'd be perfect for like a denim jacket, a decor pillow, anything that has a little bit more weight to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you a couple of examples of really basic simple stitching. So this one I did on this huge denim, it was a huge denim blanket that I got at a thrift store, and I cut them into panels so that it already had the pocket, which was crazy. It already had the seams, but you could easily do that. I keep all my denim scraps and piece them together for skirts and things. You can see it's quite a mess, because this will go in a tote bag that has a lining, so you won't see any of this. You'll also see I did some free motion stitching here, some crosses and hatches and wavy lines and little daisies. I did most of this with my favorite new stencil that I have. It's a Sashiko stencil, and I'll demonstrate how to use those. So you might have seen me post these overalls that I painted. I think it's got to be at least 2 years ago, but I'm not sure. I did them on a live for, this is a chalk mineral clay based artisan paint by Daydream Apothecary, so I think I did it on one of their lives. But I've never worn them, and I started to think, I came across them the other day. I'm like, why didn't I wear them? I don't know. I feel like I just see a different vision for them. I need it to be toned down just a little bit and a little bit patchy for me. So, and they were, after a couple of years, oops, a little bit snug. So what I've done first is open up the side, and I want to thank T. Myers, if you know her and her YouTube channel, for allowing me to just cut and not pick apart the seams with a seam ripper like I used to do. So I've cut the side open of one of the legs so that now I can do all my patching and patchwork and then sew it back. Now you can do it without opening up your side seams. It's a little more hard. You have to shimmy your hands in there to do the stitching, but it's possible. I've done some workshops and people have done that. But actually these are a little too skinny on the bottom too. I kind of like a wider fit, so a looser casual fit. So I'm going to be kind of putting a big triangle all the way down this, and that's my plan. So I'll be posting pictures. Okay, so we're going to start out with a basic patch. So whether you're working with a patch or a panel, I pretty much, if I'm hand stitching it, I pretty much follow the same routine. So one of the things you see that I've done here is I've braided down this waistband. This waistband was a little bit thick and bulky, and I wanted to lighten up this entire pair of overalls, just make them feel lighter and more airy for what I want to use them for. I'm usually working hard in them, so I want them to be a little bit lighter and airier. So the only thing I did was cut through all these layers, but I left that last layer. So you can see here, I've just opened this up and have these lovely scissors I use. And this is one of the things I've done to refashion. I've also started 2 other refashion projects of shirts that I've had. It's my #1 YouTube video, and they have faded, the ink has faded out, so I'm doing a refashion on them, and I'll have that out, I hope in a reasonable amount of time, so you can see my refashion of those. Okay, so you can see how I've scaled this back, just cut back all the layers. There must be like 8 layers, so I don't want to just leave it plain. I could do stitching, I could do decorative stitching. What I think I'm going to do is put down some of my hand-dyed lace right there in the middle, and then I could stitch that down by hand or machine. Another thing that I've done is I've cut away this main pocket here. Again, it was too hot. It was just too much. So I cut that out, and then I'm like, okay, what am I going to put there? But the thing I really wanted to put there didn't fit, so I'll show you what I did there. Here's another example of how I scaled back or graded back that area, and I'm going to do some stitching there in just a couple minutes. Now, what I did with this is I sewed a panel. Again, if you don't have a sewing machine, you could totally do this by hand with a heavy-duty thread and needle. You could YouTube how to sew by hand, just a seam by hand. And you could do it. It will take longer, What I would suggest, if you're into sewing or you want to get back to it, talk to your grandma or your aunt or your mom. Maybe they have a great old sewing machine hanging around somewhere. My favorite machines are those old metal-based machines, so I'm going to show you what I did with this. I sewed a panel to the back. I just want to get rid of some of this bulk. Even though I think that's cute, I just have been playing with one of my IOD stamps that I never used, and now it's my new favorite. If you love IOD, you know what I mean. Like, you get those favorites where you use over and over again. So I've sewn this panel that I stamped, and if you're interested to learn how I stamped, next week I will be doing a live on how I stamp with IOD stamps, and the stamp is permanent. It's not going to fade out or wash away on me. That will be next week, same time, same channel. So here I'm cutting back. This is called the Heavenly Stamp. And I've layered it out again, like I put it on a panel, so there's like 3 different layers, kind of like furniture. The more layers in your clothing, I think the more fun they become. Now I could add some basic embroidery stitching to that. And then I stamped a message in the middle, peace and love. So we'll see the progression of that. Okay, now let's get to a basic patch and how I attach it. So if this is my pant leg, I usually think about just try to look at a balance. So if I have a large amount of patches here, I might shift over. I wouldn't do another big grouping of patches here. I might bring it down a little bit. And then I might bring something down over here just to kind of balance it out, so your eye kind of moves around the piece just like you would a painting. A lot of you are artists out there, just like you would a painting. Let's say I want to sew this patch on, but I am going to layer it. So let's find... I've gathered up some of my scraps. Now this one is a scrap of denim, and what I like to do, you could measure it out and cut it precisely with your quilting rulers, but I like to snip and rip. So I see this side is already raveling, so that kind of tells me it's a side I can keep. This side is raveling, but this side I'm going to snip it and then rip it. I hope so. This is a pretty heavy weight. Now I'm going to do it over here because this side's wonky. I'm going to snip and rip. I'm going to pull off all those loose threads. And now I'm going to figure out where I want this to be on my design. So I think I'm going to put it right up here, and then this one I'm going to layer over. This was a fun, oh, Crystal, I got back out my my rubber stamp carving, and this I just did it like at 4 a.m. in the morning one time. I couldn't sleep and I just wanted to carve something, so it's pretty basic. It's just a very rustic peace sign, but it's been a long time since I did my carving blocks, and I wanted to try it out. So that's where that came in. Now I kind of need to look and see, is it going to be straight with the flow or line of the pant? Okay, so let's say I'm going to put that right here. There's a couple of ways I could secure this down for stitching. One of the ways, and sometimes when you rip and snip, you kind of have to pull. I know my home ec teacher in high school taught me this, something about getting your grains online, but I don't know. inline. I had already been sewing so many years since I was in high school home ec that it was kind of lost on me. I just had my own methods of everything already. Okay, so I didn't really learn proper, I guess. Okay, so I have just put on some washable glue. This is one way to secure down a patch or a panel for visible mending. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this. You don't need a whole lot. You just need enough so it's not going to move around on you while you're stitching. You can also get your, maybe I want to play around with it. You can get your pins and pin it on. So again, whether you're working with a patch or a panel, you could do this type of thing to secure them. Again, it really helps if you opened up your side seams. Now, if you don't want to cut up your jeans up the side or anything, I just saw a video, one of my sewists on YouTube that I love watching is, her name is Anastasia. So I will put all the supplies and links to other things in the YouTube video that I'm going to post. But she showed the correct way to use a seam ripper and what that little ball on your seam ripper is for. And I had no idea. And so I'm going to try it out next time I want to open up a seam instead of just cutting it. But again, I already wanted to add things to this. So now I'm going to hold this up and make sure to the eye that is pleasing and not crooked or wonky. And as I do that, I see, and you can see it's not really precise. If I ever get off, I just add another patch and distract the eye away from my mistake. There's always more patching to be done. Okay. Another way you could do this is, especially if you're doing some stitching and you didn't want to just go all the way around, you wanted to go like rows and lines. You can get some 1/2 inch masking tape, and if you line it up and then you just move it section by section as you do your stitching. So if I take out this middle one, I could start stitching rows in line, and then that would be my spacing. Just move it along as you go. You may or may not know what I'm talking about, but I'll demonstrate. I also have a lot of YouTube videos to come. I have been selling online tutorials for several years now. Some of you may have even purchased some. And I'm going to slowly move them over to YouTube. They will still be available to you. Okay. Now, there are a couple different threads that I like. My favorite is called, well, I don't know what my favorite. This is the easiest and I think the sturdiest to use. Is called Pearl Cotton. It's easiest to thread. It plays nicely, it doesn't get all tangled up. But then I don't know, I love the variegated embroidery thread as well. And that looks really cute. So it's hard sometimes to know which one I want to go with because there's advantages to each of them. So I've threaded up some embroidery thread. My favorite needles are these DMC. I think the pack I like the most now is just the pack of solid. They're all 5s. They're number 5s. This one is 1 to 5, and I thought the middle largest hole was a 1, but now I'm thinking it might be a 5. So I got to research that. So you get your thread. I use all 6 strands, but you can separate it out if you want a finer line. The stitching I do, I want it to be very visible, so I use all 6 strands of this thread. And I moisten it and flatten it, and I bring, I can't see, I need my ring light back. I bring the needle to the thread. And again, this is the hardest part of embroidery, is threading the needle, and it still didn't work because I'm on a live. Now I can do it pretty easily, but for a while it took me forever to thread the needle, and I bought all kinds of needle threaders. So I try to bring the needle to the thread. So there we go, all 6 strands are through there. It's easier if you're not using all 6 strands. And then I roll the bottom. You can knot it however you want. If you really want to get into stitching, there's all kinds of YouTube videos on it. So I've got my thread. Now I've got this opened up, so it's going to be a lot easier. Now I did some things years ago that I would leave the knot on top of my patch, and since these are my overalls, I'm going to do that because I like that look. It just leaves the knot on the top, but you can also come up from under the bottom and do the same thing. So with slow stitching, what's called slow stitching, you do 1 stitch at a time, and it's a very meditative process. Now right now I'm kind of imitating the cantha approach, which is the stitches and the spaces between them are pretty wide equally. So I'd taken quilt classes years ago, and the stitching was a little bit different. So a traditional quilting stitch would be, you take your stitch and then you leave this little space, and then you take your stitch again, I'll do it larger, leave a space, come up, take another stitch, leave a space, take another stitch, leave a space. So the spaces are much smaller than the stitch, but with a lot of the cantha, you'll find the stitches are wider, bolder, the spaces are larger. With Sashiko, it's much more precise, and so that's why I use my stencil. That now I don't know where I put it. I'll find it because I'm going to show you. So that's the stitch I'm doing right now. And I'm leaving a little bit of edge on the garment. Now I'm wondering, I'm sorry, I'm not fancy with my tech. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. I know a lot of people have all kinds of programs that they use. Mine is called iMovie because I usually do the edited. So again, you're doing 1 stitch at a time, especially if you have heavyweight materials. Now, with this thread, the more you work with it, it might become tangled up. So it's always helpful sometimes to kind of, if you feel like that's happening, just kind of pull it back out of there and let it go. And again, if you ever get a tangle, you can just pull it back. There, it's hooked on my pin, and let it go. So I'm going to keep going around. Now, if you have a very lightweight fabric, you see I did 2 stitches at a time. Sometimes I do 3 or 4 if I'm doing like a blouse or a lightweight item. But again, with the slow stitching, it's a very meditative process, and they do 1 stitch at a time, and they think about the angle that the thread is coming out on. I don't get that complicated. I'm more like a cantha stitch. If you've seen the women do the cantha stitch, I never got into, I took so many heirloom quilting classes, but I didn't really get into them because they were too precise for me. So I'm going to round this corner. I usually like to come up at the right spacing before I turn the corner. Okay, so that's going to sew that patch down pretty well. But since I've used such large stitches, I want to go back and reinforce that. So this is just called a basic running stitch. Now I'm going to go crosswise, and it's kind of like called, I think, a hash stitch. And I'll show you a couple examples of where I use that. Let's use this second one I threaded. So now I'm going to come back through and go the opposite way. I'm going to come from the bottom this time. So my knot's going to be on the back side. And I will show you how I tie these off. And now I'm going to go across this way. So I want to poke it in here. And I want my needle to come out in the middle of these two stitches, but at the place I want it to be based on the length. So it's just easiest just to do it. So this is one way you can sew on a patch or a panel. Now I'm coming out this way, and now I need to ask myself, where am I going next? Well, I'm going to come out here at the bottom here. Does it have to be precise? No, it does not. I'll show you some examples of what I do that are not precise. And I'm going to go all the way around. Now it's just double securing this patch or panel onto your garment. I love the variegated thread because it changes as I go. It just makes it a little more interesting for me. So the whole point of me refashioning these overalls is because I wasn't wearing them. They were a little bit too much for me, but now I'm adding even more. So I don't know. I think I go with that patchwork look. And if it doesn't have that, then I need to add it somehow. So I'm going to keep going all the way around. Now, when I am out of thread, and you can see I'm not pulling tight, I can always pull back to get those. I want a little bit of a little tension, but not enough where anything's puckering. And all my fabrics are pre-washed with no fabric softeners before I do any of the stitching or the painting, just because it helps with now see, I have a knot here. I'm glad this happened because now I can show you what to do. I'm going to pull back on this a little bit, and sometimes it's just a matter of, oh, my thread just decided to do that. Okay. So if I want to end this, I'm just going to come through, but I'm going to make sure I didn't poke through that top layer. I didn't poke through here. I'm just poking through that denim. Coming up, I'm going to do a slip stitch. Oh, it knotted again for me. See, the more I work with it, and I'm going to pull it out. Made a little knot that I could just pull out. Okay, so that's my knot. Now I'm going to go back through again and make sure I don't go through that top layer. Oh, I can see the top layer, so I need to not pick up so much of the fabric. Okay, it's not through the top layer. Pull it back through. Even though I've knotted it, I'm going to pull it back through another time. Now, if you're a beginner, or if I'm doing this for sale, here's what I like to do to my knots, just because I don't want anything coming apart on anyone. I've got a little bit of this Sobo glue. I just put a little bit on that knot I made and just press it in so it's just not a glob. And that should help to hold that knot together, and it's not going to slip out. I've slip knotted it and then pushed it through again. So that's just one basic way to sew on a patch. The second way is you go around and you keep going. You can do 2 rows of these running stitches. Now I want to show how to use the stencil. So this is my new favorite stencil when I'm sewing. It just makes it, I don't know, a little bit easier to get a better concise stitch. So this is available on my website as well. It's called the Sashiko Stencil. And you can see here, this is what I've used for these cross hatches. Here, I've used this here, and you see this white layer. I was doing it with ink, but I'll show you how I do it now because the ink was just a mess. Then I tried it with paint. The paint was just a mess. But you can also use this with mixed media, collage. It gives this really cool overlay mark making effect. Here I did the flowers, more of the cross, and then this stitching right here is this wavy pattern here. So I'm going to demonstrate right up here on this place that I cut away. I'm going to get, I think I'll do some crosses because those are fun. I'm gonna get, I either use like a fabric marker, or I usually just basically use a fabric marker or a white fine tip Posca pin, because I know those will not run. I heat set them. I know they're not going to run on me or smear. So let's say I just want a little row of X's here. Oh, I should check on you guys. Oh, I see Catherine. Hi, Catherine and Shell Bell. Thanks for being here. I got so into my zone. Again, I'm not used to doing lives, and Peggy's here. Peggy, I came across the fabric I cut from some of your thrift store finds. It was so much fun. Danielle, thank you guys ladies for being here. Okay, so this I could do it with the white or the blue. I have this navy that I think will tie in nicely. So I'm just gonna make some marks. Go over it a couple times. I just need to make sure the tip of the pen can go through the stencil without damaging the pen. And this is a fine point. And again, stick with your fabric markers or your acrylic paint pens and then heat set, and then you're not going to have any mess. So you see here, this is what it looks like. Now that gives me a really clear pattern that I can use for my stitching. So I'm going to go ahead and use, this is, I threaded some navy. It's going to be a subtle effect. Maybe I want it white so you guys can see it a little bit better. Let's go with that. Let's do the white. This is, I think I threaded this. Maybe not. Okay. I'm going to use white so it's really visible. I need to get my needle. I did have one threaded. I got all prepared. Now you can watch me fumble through my needle again. So again, you snip the end, moisten it, flatten it, and bring the needle to the thread. And I did it first try. Okay, I'm gonna knot the end. Since this is Sashiko, it's a little more precise. I am gonna leave my knot on the bottom. So there's a couple of ways you can do these crosses. You can do a complete cross at one time and then move along to the next one, or you can do all one direction all the way down and then go back with the other direction. It's really just a matter of preference. So when you're beginning, I would recommend doing the slow stitch method. You do one stitch at a time. So I've done this crosshatch going from my right to my left first, and now I'm poking up into the end of this one. And I'm going to go this other way. Now when I come out, I can come out and then poke up to the other end, but I'm going to do more than one at a time. I'm going to go across to that next place I need to come out of. Well, let's go back to what I said. Let's just do one stitch at a time, just in case you haven't done it before. Now I'm going to go to this one, come up, and it doesn't have to be absolutely precise. Here I'm doing one stitch at a time. Again, if your thread gets knotted, you kind of pull back on it, try to undo that knot and keep going. Okay? Now I'll show you what I do if I want to do it in a hurry. So when I'm in a hurry, I kind of shift it around. Now I'm going to just poke it up over here where I know I need to come out of. Now I'm coming in this way, and I know I have to come in this way and out this way. So I'm going to poke up here and out over here. So that's if you get going on this and you say, okay, I want it to take a little less time. So now I'm poking down here, coming up over here. Poking here, coming up over here. You can still stitch one stitch at a time. Some people do this instead of their, a lot of sewists would do this instead of their, maybe if you're into writing, you'll do your daily pages, or if you're in a self-reflective mode. But stitching is also a very meditative practice. I like to do it when have my little TV time with my hubby at night. Okay, so I've come to the end of this. Gave me a cute little accent. Kind of pull it because this has a little stretch to it. Now I'm going to come to the back, grab that layer, make sure it's not showing through a little bit. You can always come over also to the seam here. Now if I do stitch and resell, sometimes I will stitch on a patch and do some decorative things before I stitch it down to my garment. So I'll show you that next. So I've done that twice. Now I'm going to come out over here. I've used that seam to hide everything from the front. Oop, it got knotted, so I got to pull it back. That's the thing. It's a little bit, this is not the pearl cotton. It's just the inexpensive 6-strand thread, which does knot a little bit more, but I love the bulk of it. Okay, so there's that little accent. Now let's say you wanted to hide your stitching. You can always make a little patch, and then all that little crisscross stitching will be hidden, because then you'll just have the outside stitching. So here I've started that little circle pattern. A knot. Oh, Peggy, thank you. It is a little awkward when you get started. So when I get started with, example, the blanket stitch, I had, for like 2 years, I had to go to a YouTube video and look up blanket stitch, and I had to practice it. Now I've done it so much I can do it, but at first it's awkward, just like anything, like crochet or anything. Like when you first get started, you don't know what to do with your hands and how to hold the needle, and after you just do it, kind of like painting, the more you do it, the more you just figure out your way to do it. And again, I'm not a precise person, so probably if someone was really into embroidery, they might be horrified at what I'm doing right now. So here I have my little circle design that I traced with this little circle pattern, and all my little stitches are showing from the top. So if you had a patch or panel and you wanted a lot of fun stitching on it, you could do that before you sew it down to your garment. So I keep going around and do all the knotting, and then I could cut this out or rip it, snip and rip, and then I could sew it to my garment with a couple of rows of running stitch, that same basic just in and out stitch. And it wouldn't have all this showing on the back. It would be hidden. You'd only see the pretty stitches on top. Now the last thing I wanted to show you is the whip stitch. That's what it's called. The whip stitch. Okay, I'm going to show you the whip stitch on, let's do it on this little panel here. So I layered this panel and then I layered it behind here. I got rid of that center seam. It's just a lot lighter weight. I got rid of this heavy feel of this pocket, and I love this design so much. I might colorize it. I might paint it with my new batik paints. Here's my new favorite paints that I use with fabrics, and I will be demonstrating these next week. So here's my new batik paints. They're by Pent Art. I think that's how you say it. Is it Pent Art? Yes. And I have used those paints to colorize. Let's take a look at this one. So this is a refashion of a refashion too, because all the inks faded, so I've kind of redone it. But this is an example of the same stamp that I have colorized a little bit, just to make it tie in more with my garment. And on the back, you may have seen this. It's one of my most popular videos. Now I've added a butterfly. I'm going to do some stitching on that. But I wanted to show you this to show you how I colorize just a little bit to add, you know, tie it in with something. So I'm not sure if I want to do it on this or not. You never know. Probably I will. Okay, whip stitch is my last one I'm going to show you. I love doing the whip stitch on little features, like let's say this belt loop right here. It's always fun to do it on little features, or sometimes it's really fun to do it on these little pocket stitches. So I've got this variegated thread. And I'm just going to come in from the bottom. This has lots of layers of denim in it, so we'll see what happens. So now I'm just going to come in here and out over here. Come in here across, right across from it, parallel. And then I think about where is my next stitch going to land. So I come out there, and again, this does not have to be precise. I'll show you an example of some of them I've done. Come in here and come out there, and it just adds texture and a little surprise to your upcycling or your visible mending. I love when the colors change and you get that little surprise. Hi, Monica. Oh, thank you. I'm just having fun. Monica, I did these on, painted these overalls on the Daydream Apothecary Live, but I've never worn them, and I started evaluating why. I want to open up the bottoms so they're a little bit fuller on the bottom. I'm going to make them maybe into bells or just a wider leg, but also it was a lot of painting for me, like just to wear them painted. And I know some people would say, hey, yeah, just wear them as they were. It was just a lot because I painted them everywhere. So that's just that little whip stitch. You just go in and out, and it just adds the cutest little features to your collars or around your pockets or around your sleeves, wherever you just want a little bit of a little pop. So I'm going to put that here, and I'm just going to show you a couple more examples. So here on this Frida bag, I just did the whip stitch, so that's what I did along this edge here. This is the basic running stitch, and these are pretty much just whip stitch, those flowers, and then the centers would be called a seed stitch, but again, it's just like an in and out whip stitch in different directions. So those are just some basic stitches you can play around with. Here's the stitch I used to sew on the first patch, which is I take a running stitch all the way around, and then I go back the other direction. This is just a little cross thing. When I did it, I didn't have my handy little stencil that I now have glue on. This one was a fun patch, so I did it from behind the reverse applique with my machine, but then again, you look at that accent with the hand stitching, it just adds so much. Here is another example of the whip stitch. You're just going in and out, and you're paying attention to the design of the piece of lace. This was a macrame bedspread that I cut and hand dyed. Let's see if I can find more examples. Oh, here we go. And the piece I'm working on right now, this is a piece of Cantha blanket, but again, this is pretty much this border here around the vase of my flowers. That is just that whip stitch. You would just go in and out around the border, and it just adds that pop, it adds texture, and it adds fun. If I'm looking here, this is called the back stitch. You can also use a stem stitch, and these are all, you could YouTube them. This is a seed stitch, again, a little bit different whip stitch that you're just going different directions all over the place. And so it doesn't take a lot of time to just learn a few basic stitches that you can use in your visible mending. So if you look on the front here, I've done the whip stitch all the way around this border just to bring out the colors and to just finish that edge in a textured way. Here again around the circles, I just pretty much did that same whip stitch, just thought about where am I going direction wise next. I think I'm going to wrap this up. If you want to try some of these stitches, you can rewatch the video. You can go to YouTube and just type in simple embroidery stitches. But again, my purpose here was to show you just basically how to sew on a basic patch or panel. You can do this 2-directional like I did, or you can just do 2 or 3 rows of the straight stitch and your panel will stay put. Call it a night. I know we all have a big weekend coming up with the Labor Day, and I hope you guys have a great time. I'm heading up to SoCal in the morning to see my dear friend Sue and work in the beautiful SoCal shop called the Vintage Pick and Art Studio. I want to tell you about a retreat I have coming up. I'm so excited to be teaching in Texas this fall, October 15th through the 18th. Go to Kara's Color Me Creative to learn more about this retreat, or my website, fruitfullifestudio.com. Love you guys all. If you subscribe to my website, you'll see the new panels that I have coming out. I have a lot more to post. I'll do maybe a dozen a week. So I love you guys. Happy stitching, and I'll see you next time. Join me next week. Bye-bye.